So we're going to finish up our nervous system unit with a very brief overview of your senses. And I know you guys grew up with your 5 senses, your sense of taste, touch, sight, sound, and smell. But you actually have more than 5. You have a sense of pressure, you have a sense of pain, you have a sense of balance. So we're going to look at what we call the senses. Now, in the case of your senses, remember that we take the neurons of which are the electricity creating cells. We take the neurons of our bodies and we divide them up into different categories based on their functions. So when we are talking about sensory neurons, remember, sensory means that they're going to gather information. They're going to receive information from the environment. So sensory neurons are often called receptors. And we take all these sensory neurons and we divide them up into groups based on their threshold. If you remember, we talked about threshold. Threshold is what does it take to flip that light switch? What does it take to get that neuron to turn on? What does it take to get that neuron to start to create electricity? So we take sensory neurons and we divide them up based on what triggers that threshold. The first one we have here, what we call mechanoreceptors. And mechanoreceptors respond to changes in pressure. Or vibrations, things like that. So your sense of touch, your sense of pressure, and your sense of sound all fall into this group we call mechanoreceptors. Now we're going to talk about your sense of sound and the structure of the ear in a different video, but in the case of your sense of touch and your sense of pressure, both of these are what we call mechanoreceptors. Okay? What you guys grew up calling your sense of touch probably was not your sense of touch. So as you can see here, your sense of touch is not really what you think it is. It's more like your sense of pressure. We actually have 2 groups of nerves that we find inside of our skin. Our sense of touch is incredibly sensitive. These nerves are located closer to the surface of the skin, and the nerves that make up our sense of touch are what we call Meissner nerves. And like I said, when you hold something in your hand, that something has weight to it. It is pressing on your hand. When you put your clothes on, your clothes has weight to them. It is pressing on your skin. So when you put your hand on something, when you say you're touching something, you're actually pressing on it. That's not your sense of touch. That's your sense of pressure. Your sense of touch would be like feeling the wind on your skin. Remember, you have lots of little hairs on your face. You have lots of little hairs on your body. And when you feel the wind, you're actually feeling those little hairs move. You're actually feeling temperature changes up against your skin. Or like when you walk through a spider web. Basically, there's not a lot of weight there. I couldn't take a spider web and put it on a scale and expect it to measure anything. So this would be more of your sense of touch. A lot of what you call your sense of touch is actually your sense of pressure. And these are what we call Pacini nerves. Pacini, P for pressure. These rely on weight. These nerves are deeper in your skin, so you actually have to press on them. So most of what you've been calling your sense of touch your entire lives is actually your sense of pressure. So anything that presses down on your skin. It's like if you have a ring on, if you have a watch on, your clothes, when you put a pencil in your hand, you are pressing on your skin. That is your sense of pressure. Other mechanoreceptors, again, your sense of hearing and sense of balance, these involve changes in vibrations. These also involve weight pressing down on nerves. But we're going to do more of those in a separate video. We also have sensory neurons that have to do with heat. And again, remember, neurons are the nerve cells that create electricity. Well, just like you have to flip a light switch on, something has to turn these cells on. Something has to cause these cells to create electricity. Well, in the case of our photoreceptors, photoreceptors are the neurons that we have inside of our eye. And again, I'm going to have another video that talks about the structure of the eye and how the eye works. But in the case of photoreceptors, these are nerves that have light as a threshold. Basically what happens, we have rods and cones inside of our eyes. And as the light is absorbed by the retina, which is dark, your pupil is a hole. Your pupil's not black. The inside of your eye is a dark brown, a blackish color. And you guys know black absorbs light. It absorbs heat. Well, that causes the rods and cones of your eyes to heat up. Well, when they heat up enough, you flip the switch. Threshold is reached, and they will begin to create electricity. These are examples of bipolar neurons. And we're going to talk more about them again when we do your eye. But we also have what are called thermoreceptors, and thermoreceptors respond to changes in temperature. Most of these are found in our skin, and so we have the Krauss nerve, which responds to cold, and the Ruffini's nerve, which responds to things that are warm. But what this video is going to focus mostly on are the chemoreceptors we have in our body. Just like the name says, these are neurons that respond to different chemicals. So this would be your sense of taste, and this will be your sense of smell. And it's very hard to teach them separately because you kind of can't have one without the other. So in the case of chemoreceptors, these use chemicals for different thresholds. And so our sense of taste, our sense of smell, and yes, you have your sense of pain. Okay? Pain is your body's way of telling you that something is wrong. And it responds to chemicals that we have in our bodies. So chemoreceptors. In the case of our sense of smell, chemicals from the air get absorbed by the epithelial tissue inside of our nose. When we absorb enough chemical, it allows us to smell. Saliva has chemicals in it, and our taste buds will absorb these chemicals. And when we absorb enough of them, we reach threshold and we can taste something. Okay? And since everyone has a different threshold, people taste and smell things differently. And again, pain nerves are triggered by high amounts of histamine. We talked more about pain and the role of histamine when we did the immune system. So let's look at your sense of taste. Your sense of taste is what we call your gustatory. Okay? Remember, you have your glossopharyngeal nerve, which is responsible for your sense of taste. Well, we talked about your tongue and your taste buds when we did the digestive system. Right? And remember, 90% of what you think you're tasting, you're really smelling. Okay? If you remember, you have these taste buds. Taste buds are basically folds. They're called papilla. Remember, anytime you see pap means that it is a fold. We have these folds called papilla. And inside of each of these folds, you have different nerves. Well, some of these nerves will threshold with things that are salty. Some of these nerves will threshold with things that are sugar. But these are your taste buds. So if you think of your taste buds as fingers, the saliva, when we chew, we mix our food with saliva, and the saliva will then spread out the chemicals over your entire tongue. And this allows you to begin to taste things. So again, the nerve that we find inside of taste buds are called gustatory nerves. And if you can remember, you only have 4 different senses of taste. You can taste if something is sweet. You can taste if something is salty. You can taste if something is an acid, so it's sour. You can taste if something is a base, it's bitter. So each type of taste bud will have a different type of gustatory nerve. And all of these nerves will send information to your glossopharyngeal nerve. Now, think of all the chemicals we put inside of our tongue. Acids, bases, they can kill cells. Okay? Hot things can build up scar tissue. So over time, you will develop a thick layer of skin over your tongue, and these taste buds will die. So that's why food will start to taste different as you get older. So I don't know if you've noticed, a lot of older people tend to use a lot of salt and a lot of pepper on their food. That's because a lot of their taste buds have died, and they need that extra amount in order to get the threshold to be reached. So when we look at our tongue, here are the types of taste buds we have. In the case of your papilla, we have our filiforms. And filiforms, if you remember, get their name because they're shaped like our fingers. They're long and skinny like filaments. And you can see that these are mostly found on the tip of your tongue, and these respond to things that are sugars and salts. Now, one filiform will not do both. You have some filiform that just respond to sugar, and you have some filiforms that just respond to salts. Fungiforms get their name because they look like mushrooms. They respond to acid, so this is what gives you the sour taste, and you can see that they're found mostly on the sides of your tongue. And then way back in the back, we have these really big circular taste buds. These are called your circumvallates, and these respond to things that are bitter. This is why when we talk about foods having an aftertaste, it has a base in it. And if you think about it, you are breathing the same time you're chewing. That's why when you're chewing, most of your saliva collects in the front of your mouth. That way it doesn't accidentally drip down your glottis and go into your lungs. Basically, it went down the wrong tube. So the food doesn't hit your taste buds way back here in the back until you've swallowed. And it takes a little while for your brain to register that. So you actually don't taste the bitterness until after you've swallowed, hence the term aftertaste. And if you'll notice, we don't have a lot of taste buds right here in the middle. Well, it's believed the reason for that is if you think about it, when you put your food in your mouth, most of your food goes right here. So if it's hot, you're going to burn your tongue. You're going to damage those taste buds. But as you chew and if you put something right in the center of your tongue, you don't taste anything. But as you chew and you mix that food with the saliva, or as it sits there and the saliva begins to mix with it, and then the chemicals will begin to run down to different places, that at that point in time, you'll be allowed to taste what it is that you have in your mouth. Which then leads us to our sense of smell, which is what we call your olfactory. And again, 90% of what you think you're tasting, you're actually smelling. Because if you remember, your throat, your digestive system, and your respiratory system are connected. Okay? Right up here on the roof of your mouth, you have two openings. Those two openings are called your nares, and they actually lead up to your nose. So as you're chewing, you're breathing. And so as you're chewing, you're releasing chemicals and you're breathing those chemicals, so you're smelling those chemicals. So a lot of what you think you're tasting, you're actually smelling. This is why food tastes funny when you're sick. The food doesn't taste funny. You're just stuffy and you can't smell it like you're used to. But in the case of your sense of smell, we have smelling nerves. And these smelling nerves are called olfactory receptor cells. They come off of our olfactory nerve. If you remember, our olfactory nerve is a cranial nerve. And here you can see these olfactory receptor cells. They're also called hairs, because if you'll notice, they look really hairy. But these are located on the roof of your nasal cavity. You do have a very few of them in the back of our mouth, but not really enough to talk about. Okay. We call these ORCs, olfactory receptor cells. They have lots of dendrites. Remember, in the case of a neuron, neurons have all of these dendrites that branch off of them. Okay. And then we have the axon. All of these dendrites, the more dendrites you have, the more you can absorb, the more you can vibrate, the more information you can gather. And we're breathing in air. And so that's a lot of room for things to spread out. So we want to be able to gather as much of these chemicals as we possibly can. So we have a lot of these dendrites. So kind of think of it as a filter. So they look hairy. So like I mentioned, we also call these your olfactory hairs. These are the only nerves in your body that have the ability to regenerate for a small period of time. However, most of these, and regenerate means repair themselves, but we lose this ability as children. And again, remember, your sense of taste is often confused with your sense of smell. So when you're stuffy, food tastes